let's start. Again, good morning, everyone. And today we will be looking into the healthcare sector. A little bit about who we are, UOW Malaysia KDU. Just for the benefit of those who have just attended our first time attending this session itself. UOW Malaysia KDU has a history of about almost 36 years by now, with a brand name of KDU, where we have 4 campuses so far, 2 in Klang Valley, 1 in Damansara Jaya, and another one is in Utropolis Glen Mary, the one that you see in the picture. It's our flagship campus in Glen Mary, Shah Alam. We also have 2 more campuses up north in Penang Island, 1 in Georgetown, and another one in Batu Kawan on the mainland side as well. And since the end of 2018, we have started to have a strategic partnership with UOW, University of Wollongong, Australia. And now KDU is part of the global network for UOW Malaysia KDU. So with that, the access have been tremendous for KDU students and academicians, and as well as the industry partners as well, tapping into UOW Global Network, not only in Australia, but also in Dubai, Hong Kong, and now, of course, is in Malaysia as well. Okay, so that's a little bit background of who we are, UOW Malaysia KDU. And now let me introduce to you the panelists for today's session. Okay, the first one, we have the President of Association of Private Hospitals Malaysia, APHM, Datuk Dr. Kuljit Singh. Datuk, you would like to say hello to everyone first? You need to unmute yourself, then you can speak,
Okay, good morning to all of you who are participating in this webinar, and also to my fellow panelists, and thank you very much to UOW in inviting me to be one of your panelists. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And of course, besides being the president of APHM, Datuk Dr. Kuljit Singh is also currently the medical director at Prince Court Medical Center as well. Next, we have a Miss Norzifiah Aziz, or short form, we'll call her, basically address her as G Aziz here today. Miss G, she is the group CFO of Ramsay, Sime, Darby Healthcare. Miss G, please, you will let's say hello to everyone.
Hi, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Dr. Brian, and UOW for inviting me to be a panelist, and hello to my fellow panelists as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ms. G. And as you can see from the brief of Ms. G's bio here, I particularly like the way she says that, in today's challenging environment, a finance leader is no longer just to play the role as a bean counter, but as a bean grower. So it's really important for a finance person to get really involved into the business side of the healthcare sector specifically, right? And the next one we will have is our advisory panelist, Miss Lee Yi Keng. She's the head of healthcare in KPMG in Malaysia. Yi Keng, please.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, everyone. And it's actually a pleasure to be actually one of the panelists here, because I guess healthcare sector is a sector which is very actually close at heart to everyone now, especially after the this COVID-19, and we're still in the recovery stage to a certain extent. So I'm kind of excited, to be actually one of the panelists, and actually also talking to the key people in the sector, and also to actually listen to a lot of you all in the sector as well, what sort of challenges you all are actually facing. And of course, as advisory, we would love to actually hear the challenges, which is actually an opportunity to all of us as well. So over to you, Brian.
Okay, thanks, Yi Keng. So to the attendees, if you have any questions, you can start to jot down your question, and if you would like, you also can post your question now into the Q&A box, not in the chat box. But if you happen to put it into your chat box, it's fine, Perhaps, but before we start, it will be great that you can indicate yourself, a little bit background of yourself in the chat box, whether are you from the industry, or are you a student or an academician, for our knowledge. Good, Otherwise, you can also start to get your questions posted into the Q&A box. That when we open up the session for Q&A, I will read out the questions, and the panelists will address those questions accordingly. Okay. Now, a little bit background of today's session. Before we move on to get the panelists to give you some their views. we have been talking about the widespread of COVID-19 since the beginning of the year, or in fact the cases was reported end of last year, and it has caused a lot of lockdown in most parts of the world, and this is based on Bloomberg's latest data this morning. It has been about almost 2 million people confirmed cases worldwide, and about 408,000 deaths, almost 409,000 deaths instead, being US, UK, and Brazil being the top 3 destinations of having the highest cases by now. Okay, well, in the Malaysian case, there have been several economic stimulus packages has been introduced itself. First, we are talking about the first stimulus package back on the 27th of February 2020, worth about 20 billion ringgit, announced by the then interim Prime Minister to Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, and later on, a month later, the current Prime Minister Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin has announced the first Malaysia pre-Hartin economic stimulus package worth about 250 billion ringgit Malaysia. And just recently, a few days ago, he has also announced the latest Penjana stimulus package worth about 35 billion ringgit Malaysia. Well, despite the changes of the introduction of the stimulus packages, we noticed that consumers' behavior has changed tremendously, and therefore it has really shifted the market towards the new normal itself. And specifically in the healthcare sector, just to share my own experience, I used to go to my family clinic. It has been always long queue day and night in that particular clinic, but during the MCO period, it's really so little people that visit the clinic. So people were saying that if I have any medical condition, if I can just stay for a while at home and get it cured by itself instead of going to see a doctor, they will do so instead of the usual way. In the previous situation, they will, a little bit fever, they will go and see doctor, for example. And therefore, it has really challenged the norm of, or the myth per se, of a healthcare sector used to be known as a recession-proof sector. So is it really true? Is this standstill valid itself? It's something that we want to find out today in today's virtual discourse session here. Okay, so therefore, it's really for us to look into the condition of the healthcare sector which they are facing now, and perhaps the panelists can shed some light on some survival tips for business reformulation or remodeling for any businesses around this sector itself. So this is the main context of today's session to share with everybody here. So without further ado, let me invite first the advisory panelist view, Ms. Yi Keng, to share her views on what is happening in the healthcare sector, particularly due to this pandemic condition as well as the MCO period. Yi Keng, please.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Brian. Well, I guess this is a very interesting sector, I would say, and the healthcare actually system follows similar path with the epidemic unfolds. The healthcare sector actually falls within a U shape, we call that, quadrant, where the companies will actually recover, but along a protracted path requiring reserves and capitals to endure and transform operating models to emerge even stronger and more in line with the changes in the consumer priorities. Now, just now Dr. Brian did mention about going to the seeking consultation. Things has also changed. There's actually a sort of a fear factor in it. On that accord, as healthcare providers and systems flatten the curve and exceed the confinement, there is a need for resolution near to midterm challenges as they adjust to the new norm. Now, what is the new norm? And there are 5 areas where healthcare providers should be looking into in their journey to adapt and respond to the challenges post the COVID-19. Now, first of all, the area that everyone definitely know, not just only healthcare, but in any industry, is to do with automation. It's talk about digital healthcare. Returning to traditional business model will hampered by reduce or change in the demand going forward. Therefore, there is a compelling need to explore disruptive business model, innovations to meet change in consumer priorities, enhanced a significant investment in enabling technologies to manage issues flexibly and also coordinate via actually established systems. The hospital outpatient and general practitioners appointments across the world has already been transformed, with as much as actually 3/4 of all consultations now are taking place virtually. Now, they should not be actually going back as patients, just like any students, when you actually pick up a new digital habits that will actually reduce the travel cost, the cost actually of admission and overall cost of healthcare to a certain extent. The other area that will be actually really changing is an agile workforce. Now, healthcare workers has been actually hailed as the heroes of this crisis. Now, Thailand has brought forward for a sizable workforce automation and reskilling. Now, redeployment and reskilling actually strategies become actually key to transformation effort, and actually long-term view is needed to actually change the operating model, and investment in digital talent is actually required. It's as simple as, you know, I know some of the hospitals, certain areas or departments has actually been quite low in volume. They mobilize actually the staff instead of actually, you know, retrenching. Mobilize is as good as even taking temperature to a certain extent. Now, the other area is talking about an agile model. Now, to entails actually a need for a dynamic, responsive care pathway with actually a very clear overview of the patient flow and also the resource at actually hand. Now, the fourth area that everyone is looking into is also a resilient actually supply chain. Now, with the surge of actually PPE during the pandemic, now digital transformation initiative will accelerate, forcing companies to reconfigure their actually supply chain while reconstructing actually supply chain with a greater force of transparency, agility, and also ethics. Now, many governments and actually healthcare system across the world has already actually considering the wisdom of actually being too reliant on offshore supplies. And we can actually expect to see relocation back, and you can actually see countries like, you know, Russia, US, and Germany, and even Saudi Arabia is actually doing the relocation back to their country on actually producing some of this critical supply. Now, last but not least, and this is actually probably something very close to the heart of a private healthcare provider, is actually financial resilience. There is always a balancing now between actually servicing the current debts and also funding the needs to actually transform, to actually enable the providers actually weather the challenges ahead. Now, well, these are actually my opening remarks, and we can actually discuss further these points. Over to you, actually, Dr. Brian.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Keng. So next, we would proceed on to the views from the sector panelists. Yeah. So for that, I would like to invite first the president of APHM, Datuk Dr. Kuljit Singh. Datuk, please.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you to all of you all once again. Yes, this COVID pandemic has actually taught us a lot of new norms, which we had certain norms already there in the market for many years. The kind of meeting that we are having today wouldn't have happened 1 year ago. We would definitely want to meet in a hotel. We would probably prefer meeting each other face to face, looking at each other's body language. And we find that that was the way to go at one point in time. But today, I think digitalization will take a center stage in almost all industries. On the private health front, yes, in private healthcare in Malaysia, we have, especially private hospitals, we have got two segments. One segment is the domestic patients, those patients within the country. And then, of course, the other segment is medical tourists. Digitalization works very well in terms of seeing patients that you already know, patients that has already been on your follow-up, and you know the condition of the patients. And many a times patients would like to communicate with the healthcare provider and follow through what needs to be done, whether the patient needs to come back to see the doctor. Those kind of consultation seem to be very good. Many hospitals are looking at that model. But in medicine, it is still the factor of examining the patient and going into details of providing healthcare will still require more than just consultation. So it will be a good way to talk to the patient, but end of the day, both medical legally and also on the clinical practice, you still have to see the patient physically and examine the patient. So if you're looking at digitalization, it may not be a total digitalization like in any other industry, because in healthcare, it might be a little bit different. Unless healthcare is totally inaccessible, you have someone that you can communicate with in a remote area, and that doctor can actually help after your consult. That would be a little bit different. Come to medical tourists, we have been thinking about medical tourism through digital healthcare, but actually that doesn't really work so well, because the most important part of medical tourism is to get the patient into your country. That's where economically it makes sense having the patient in your country. It's not just seeing the doctor, but it's the tourism part of having the patient. So many patients who are doing medical tourists are still seeking ways of coming back to see doctors and visiting hospitals physically. So there would be a bit of a hybrid, but to have total digitalization, there might be some concerns. Definitely right now, as we go to our MCO, we find that our hospitals are getting a little bit more busier. Patients are returning back to hospitals to see doctors. And I think patients have waited for 2.5 months, 3 months. There are certain conditions that probably they cannot wait anymore. And we also encourage patients that you must see a doctor, not to delay. And because we don't want patients to create another complication for themselves, and that itself will cause an increased healthcare cost to the patient. So I just to end up, what I'm trying to say right now is, well, digitalization is a way to go, but there will be a little bit of tweak to it. We have to be very careful. We are now recovering. Patients should come back to hospitals, should see doctors, get your follow-up done as soon as they can, but with a lot of prevention and precaution, because COVID is still there, out there in the community. It is just a matter of how many number of hosts that the COVID can attack will start multiplying.
Right. Okay, thank you very much, Datuk, for your first view on this. So from the business perspective, Datuk has talked about a lot on the type of segments that the hospitals are serving now, and of course the need of digitalization. But the main issue here is the adoption of digitalization. It has to be done in a proper manner, and if there is any effectiveness on that particular adoption of technology, it always has to be weighed properly, right? Yeah, I guess that's the main message that Datuk is trying to share here. Next, I would like to invite Ms. G, Aziz, from Ramsay, Sime, Darby Healthcare. Ms. G, please.
Yep, thank you, Brian. Well, I think everybody has mentioned about the severity of the COVID-19 on businesses, which is unprecedented, and there are demand cutbacks, supply chain disruptions, and also knock-on effects of troubled sectors unemployment, which are challenging most businesses, and we in private hospitals are not excluded. So we saw the health and economic crisis that has a sustainable impact on consumer behavior, which Dr. Brian mentioned earlier, and also it changes their purchasing habits. And supply chain, especially on PPE, have been tested, and we in the business sector have a very short window to prepare for all this impact. I think Ramsay Sime Darby, we don't really qualify for most of the government relief, and we have to actually seek support from our bankers, our major suppliers, and also our major debtors and patients, like the insurance company and also corporate clients. So as in any challenging environment, from the business point of view, the key to a successful outcome is actually requiring us to make a comprehensive and realistic understanding of the issue. We need to be agile, just what Keng mentioned earlier. What we did, I'll share with you the experiences and what we did in Ramsay and Darby. So we set up a cross-functional command center comprising of group leaders and also senior members of the operations to discuss issues and make swift decisions. And as part of the global company, we are actually lucky to be able to learn and share experiences from the other Ramsay hospitals globally. Communication is also key to ensure our stakeholders, including our staff, doctors, consumers, are constantly updated of new information, especially in the internet era. We have got so many news which may not be true. So things that we have done to ensure that we can ride through this economic stress brought about by this pandemic is actually, number one, to preserve cash. And survival of companies during COVID-19 will be dependent on their ability to maintain cash and liquidity, financial resilience, like what Keng mentioned earlier. So since we saw a significant drop in elective surgeries, outpatient visits, we, during the first 2 weeks, probably a month of the MCO, so we actually do a 3-month forecast, sensitivity analysis, and then to make sure that we are prepared for the worst. In addition, we also carefully track all the COVID-19 expenses like PPE, because when demand is high and supply is short, a lot of these PPE are actually, the prices have actually shot up tremendously. So we have to ensure that we have sufficient PPE for our frontliners. Healthcare workforce may be at risk of being out of work, which will then impact our hospitals. So we must make sure that it doesn't threaten our productivity and shrinks the capacity of the hospital frontliners. Besides doing the 3 months rolling forecast, we actually make sure that we maintain liquidity. So we engage with our bankers early to ensure that the banking facilities that we have is still intact. Access to liquidity during crisis tighten up. So we have to ensure that we do this. We also make sure that we issue timely billing to collectors. We expedite issuance of invoices, and we also change and discuss repayment scheme with the affected companies and corporates. We proactively discuss and negotiate with our vendors to ensure we have consistent supply of PPE. We are lucky in Ramsay Sime Darby because we have got Ramsay International Procurement Office in Singapore that would be able to source for PPE when we are short in Malaysia. So we managed to get some help from Ramsay International Procurement Office. It is also critical to restore consumer confidence because, as the two panelists has mentioned, a lot of patients are actually fearful of coming to the hospital because they are worried about hospital infection. So we have to reshape our marketing, service delivery, taking into consideration the change in our customer behavior. I think without a doubt, everybody is sort of transformed digitally in this crisis. We didn't have telehealth, but because of COVID-19, we have actually rolled out our telehealth services, and we have other means of launching digital healthcare, exploring rollout of out of hospital care, delivery of medication to homes. So we have launched digital the drive-through COVID testing, mainly in Indonesia. Before this, I think traditionally healthcare players are a bit slow to adopt to digitalization. I think COVID-19 has actually transformed that and have accelerated the adoption of digitalization in hospitals. We were also looking at investment and asset acquisition. So we have to reprioritize and we scan for opportunity now, because we know we have to identify distressed assets. We know there are probably assets which may not be able to survive the pandemic. So I think in every crisis there is an opportunity. So we are actively looking at available assets for sale. So these are the things that if you have got financial diligence and strong financial standing, it will benefit during this pandemic.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Ms. G. Yeah, I appreciate your sharing of some cases here, specifically from Ramsay, Darby perspective. Yeah. So we'll move on now to the Q&A section. So again, let me remind the participants, if you have any questions, please send your questions through the Q&A box, yeah, so that we can address to those your questions accordingly there. Okay. Otherwise, let's do some discussion here, that's right. Keng, you have I understand that from this KPMG recently you have published a report for post MCO reset, right? And I'm referring to there's a 4-quadrant thingy where KPMG suggested that healthcare sector is under this transform to re-emerge quadrant. Yeah, can you explain a bit on what exactly is this transform to re-emerge quadrant means to the sector?
Basically, if you actually look at it, and in the starting point where we actually talk about transform, it is a sector where you are rightly pointed out a little bit of recession-proof to a certain extent. But if you are able to actually transform and able to survive and actually weather through these difficult times, and you're able to also actually transform, you will actually have a better opportunity to even actually secure other opportunities behind. Because just now, as G actually mentioned, there are actually potentially other competitors that will actually lag behind. And if you're able to actually weather through and actually transform ahead of the rest, you will have actually opportunities to even take over some of your competitors' market share, for example, or even actually expand to a certain extent where this is the time where the assets could be actually a bit stressed, and it's good time for you all to even actually think of expanding, because skills matter to a certain extent, and this is what we actually say, if you actually can transform, you actually even emerge in a better position.
I see. Earlier on in your view, right, you also mentioned there are 5 areas to look at in the healthcare sector, right? We talk about automation, agile workforce, agile model, resilient supply chain, as well as financial resilience. Yeah. Will this apply only on healthcare providers? But what about healthcare devices or healthcare supplies businesses?
I would say generally it is, but it depends on actually the manner it has been actually implemented. To a certain extent, I would actually say it applies to most actually sector. Because if you look about digitization, is more to getting actually better access, okay, getting actually things actually in a speedy manner, and also actually getting more transparency in terms of actually gathering data and etc. Now, agile workforce, even in any sector, you have to actually be more agile in actually response, because we have customers and we have suppliers, we have staff, we have actually the whole ecosystem around us to be actually working together with. So again, this is actually an agile care model is also because of the whole ecosystem. We need actually speed and to respond to actually the changes around us. Not to mention about, you talk about supply chain. because actually the pandemic, they have actually blocked a lot of actually even PPE coming into the country for a certain period of time. At the same time, the surge of actually demand to a certain extent. And with the agile actually supply chain, when we talk about actually digital, we are not only talking about actually the medical part of it. We are actually talking about actually using even for your actually back room to better manage your back room, and therefore you are actually more resilient in terms of your supply chains and also actually in your financial point of view. So digitalization is not just about your frontline actually service, but in your whole organization and operations, and it is part and parcel of actually even your what we call the business continuity plan as well.
I see. Okay. Dr. Kuljit, Keng has indicated, right, one of the key things here is on resilient supply chain, where a lot of a lot of supply basically started to look into localization instead, right, instead of from overseas itself. Do you foresee your members in APHM will be, looking at getting supplies from local companies instead of overseas?
I think it's the main issue would be the price, because everyone will be very price sensitive at this stage. So if something is available locally, of course, locally available products would be easy to get. You don't have to wait for it to go through the port, and then you have the excise duties and all sort of stuff that you have at the port. So of course, locally you can, but unfortunately, a lot of medical supplies, we don't get much locally at the rate that we would want. Except gloves, probably. Gloves are probably worldwide. We make the most number of gloves in the world, which I just discovered during the COVID pandemic when I had a discussion with the glove industry people, that we are the champions in the world as far as gloves are concerned. Yeah. Other products like PPEs and the rest, we are very much dependent with supply coming from outside. Local industry is not really very big in those kind of substances like PPE. We're talking about medical equipment. I think largely all medical equipment all come from overseas. So that is going to be a challenge right now, because everyone is short of spare parts, medical equipment, upgrading, and all that will take time. So I think we'll be still reliant to the international market, but I guess they will all open up because everybody wants the business anyway.
Right. Okay. Good. Also, another thing that Keng also indicated, talking about these virtual consultation, right? And I think Ms. G also mentioned just now, from Ramsay, Sime, Darby perspective, started to introduce telehealth and digital health as well. Do you foresee this will be the moving forward strategy that most hospitals in private hospitals in Malaysia should be adopting as well?
I think they will have these portals ready, because there will be some patients would want to consult the doctor first or speak to the doctor first before they come. Or they have already seen the doctor, and then now there are these final few questions that they haven't asked, they may want to. So as I said earlier, it is actually limited just to consultation. It will not going to be something whereby you could see the doctor online and then the doctor can prescribe you some medication, then you go and take the medication from a local pharmacy and it's done, because medically and ethically that is not right. And most indemnities for doctors will not cover the doctor if there is a problem in the consult, because you have not seen the patient physically. So as I said, there are limitations, but it is something that we should have, because there are times, I mean, I'm a practicing doctor myself. I'm not just a medical director. I practice patients. I just saw patients before getting onto this webinar, and I got patients waiting for me after this webinar. So yeah, definitely there is a role, but we cannot replace that with a total solution to see patients. You still have to see patients physically. Especially when you have hospital-based patients, because these patients require more than just a consult.
I see. Okay, we'll come back to you on these questions later, right? Because I know that there is a virtual hospital launch in the US in the last few years ago, and well, of course, they are not only targeting at local patients, but they're also looking at medical tourists as well, going into US. But we'll get back to you later, yeah, on this medical tourism topic. Miss G, we have a question for you from Rafi Roslan here. How do you intend to reinstill customer confidence to seek consultation when they are unwell in clinics and hospitals?
Okay, what we have done in our hospital to restore customer confidence is ensuring that the SOPs that we have in place, the temperature checked, and say, for example, for we must ensure that all inpatient admission, they are tested for COVID-19. So we do all sorts of SOPs and updated our SOPs to ensure that customers feel safe in our hospital. So I believe social distancing, wearing masks, all the good habits are being in place to ensure customer confidence is actually restored. In addition to that, apart from doing all this SOP, we must ensure that we advertise accordingly as well. So we did that in our hospitals. And I can see from the number of cars that are being parked outside the hospitals, it's every day it has been increasing. So that's a good sign across the 3 hospitals that we have in Malaysia.
I see. Okay. Next thing is I would like to really understand, right? As you say, most of the economic stimulus packages introduced in Malaysia, of course, is very much focusing on the SMEs, right? So large hospitals like Ramsay or even IHH groups, for example, probably they won't be able to get any benefit out of it itself. Yeah. But there are certain things that where in the latest Penjana stimulus package talk about it's the tax-free for foreign investments into Malaysia, right? Do you foresee there's a possibility for large conglomerates like Ramsay as well as IHH to even consider the possibility of a vertical integration or vertical supply extension instead of just investing into the hospital services itself?
Yes, we are looking into that. In fact, during the peak of the pandemic, where there was short of supply of PPE, we even explored the possibility of actually sewing up the gowns ourselves. So we have actually looked at certain manufacturing in Malaysia to take advantage or to acquire or probably to start a greenfield in terms of setting up the manufacturing up for the production of our PPE. I think that one of the lessons learned during this pandemic is that we need to be self-sufficient. So like what Dr. Kuljit mentioned, if we can get the PPE locally and the pricing is better off, it is best actually to have our own PPE manufacturing outfit. We are exploring that.
Right. Okay. With the current condition, right, especially as what Ms. G mentioned, the demand for, say, for example, elective surgery has been, it's not the main thing that people are looking for now. And obviously the demand is getting lesser. And the survival of these smaller clinics, specializing in these niche areas might have an issue as well, especially if they cannot really preserve their cash or maintain liquidity. Do you also foresee there's a potential of more M&As coming in the way in the industry?
Yes, definitely. I think there will probably be more distressed assets, and it is an opportunity that the bigger healthcare players should take advantage of.
Right. Okay, Dr. Kuljit, can I have your comments on how are the hospitals doing financially, generally among your members?
Okay, everyone was down almost 20% of business at one stage. And then it slowly picked up to almost 50%. And I think today we see that the numbers have actually rised up. And like what Aziz said, that the patient patients are actually coming back. And you know, the normal Malaysian, I would say the human being way of looking at it, when there's MCO is relaxed, they feel that the COVID is gone. So the fear factor is probably lesser right now. But the hospitals which are very reliant on medical tourists, they are having a bit of an issue. So hospitals in Klang Valley may not be affected, but private hospitals in Malacca and Penang, which were basically built on the basis of having medical tourists, they are struggling a little because 60 to 50%, and I heard that some hospitals were up to 90% reliant on medical tourists. They are going to have a bit of an impact because they cannot tap on the domestic market overnight. But they are structured and they're known to be a medical tourist hospital. So those hospitals may have some issues. We have addressed this problem with the Minister of Finance 1 week back, citing the fact that hospitals, private hospitals may look, they do well and they probably don't need help, but in actual fact, there are some hospitals will actually need help, otherwise they might close down if these borders don't open up for the next couple of months or even a year. We are not sure when the borders will be open, and if the borders are open, what kind of restriction the government is going to impose, like quarantine and self-quarantine, and there are so many factors into it. So looking at it, yeah, there will be some hospitals will take a bigger brunt out of this pandemic.
I see. Okay. Keng, basically both the sector panelists already indicated about financial distress among some of the hospitals or clinics in Malaysia, right? From the advisory perspective, how long do you think a hospital or a clinic can sustain if the demand is getting, doesn't really grow as what they would like to? Or like what Datuk mentioned just now, if the border still remains closed, yeah, how much will it affect, hospitals and clinics in Penang and Malacca specifically are very much into health tourists?
Well, I guess it depends on the hospitals. First of all, is if you are within actually a big group, you will definitely have a bandwidth from actually the parent to actually continue support, because how long can this actually last? I'm sure to a certain extent when we can actually manage and contain, and rightly pointed out that even some are actually knocking the door to actually come and actually seek for treatment, even in overseas. It's a question of how fast the government can actually contain the situation. How much confidence can actually the country give it to actually the tourists as well? So that first of all is basically looking to actually how long. It all depends on the cash flow that entity has. Because some of them are actually high geared, some are actually totally zero gearing to a certain extent, and some of them could be already actually have funding coming from the parent company. But those who are standalone, and I know of some hospitals who are really highly geared, well, half a year moratorium is already given to a certain extent. A lot actually start discussing with actually bankers to even give a 1-year moratorium and to actually waive all the interest as well at this point in time, to actually get them actually still continue surviving for the domestic market, and also to a certain extent whatever they can actually defer in terms of actually the capital expenditure and etc. To a certain extent that helps, and the government stimulus front, to a certain extent, all this I would say the hospital who are actually having a lot of losses coming from the health tourism, I would say the profits are actually down by more than 50%. And there are some subsidies to a certain extent coming from the government to actually at least subsidize some of actually the payroll of their staff. So there's actually many ways to skin a cat. It all depends on actually the entity itself, whether they are actually highly geared, whether they have buffer to actually wave through this pandemic. And I would actually say they need actually about 6 months to a year to get back to actually really the new norm, I would say.
Okay, so it's about half a year to a year time, yeah? So it's about a year to half a year time, right, for us to see any results coming in here. Datuk, I understand that last week or so you have a meeting with the finance minister, right? Yeah, so I'm going to ask a bit more of some tips here from your meeting with him, and also, of course, there are also some other representatives from the healthcare sector as well, right? So this is aligned with the question asked by Khalis Lokman here. Since digital healthcare will be the new normal, it obviously requires more financial support. Will the MOH support all the private hospitals regarding to this new norm in terms of health digitalization?
I think MOH per se will not get involved directly with the private healthcare. MOH is basically more concerned about their hospitals, and they are also in the midst of digitalizing their hospitals, because the main thing that they have to do right now is digitalizing their medical records. Whereas private hospitals, the new ones are already, they have already started off digitalizing, or they start off with the digitalized platforms as far as medical records are concerned. We have raised this issue with the MOF that we need some stimulus package to help us cope in this new norm, including in terms of digitalization. But of course, the Ministry of Finance have got enough on their plate. They're looking at industries where the income is zero. So I think they have to prioritize, but definitely they're looking at it. But what we have asked the Ministry of Finance is to look into public-private partnership, because right now we have got a lot of private hospitals. Some of those medical tourist hospitals may not have enough patients, so they got enough of facilities available whereby the public sector can actually buy services from the private hospitals. One is you can reduce the waiting time and the crowding of public hospital by buying services from the private at an agreed price. And you can also indirectly sustain these private hospitals which have got invested, all the investment which doesn't bring back any return on investment right now. So it's a win-win situation, and the government may not have money at this point of time to further expand their services because there's a lack of cash flow in every sector, including even perhaps the government. So I think this would be a good opportunity, as we suggested to the Minister of Finance, to start public-private partnership seriously, because it will actually help all parties.
I see. Okay.
We're still waiting to have more discussion on this.
Right. But do we expect anything going to happen in the next 3 months or so with the MOF?
Well, in the public-private partnership, we've been talking to the government for the last 15 years.
Okay.
We've seen different ministers, different governments come and go, but this has never been, materialized the way we expect it. But I'm actually gearing up by consulting the Ministry of Finance to move this to the next step, because this is the time to do it. If we don't do it now, I don't think so. The impetus and the willingness will be there in the future when everything goes back to normal. We see that we can actually help the government in a very big way, and a lot of their load can be offset to us. But of course, it should be on an agreed price. If they're going to offer something which is below our cost, then of course it's going to be very difficult.
Okay, great. There's a question here by Wing Tae here. Local glove makers are increasing the average selling price progressively. Do you think this will impact the private healthcare sector? And should the government regulate the price of glove or maybe mask, for example? So from perhaps Datuk, you may want to address this first from the APHM president perspective.
I think the price control have got issues, because when we use items to treat a patient, it is not an item that we sell to the patient. It is not a retail. I did mention in one of my newspaper reports that we are not, private hospitals are not retail outlets. So you buy a glove, you buy a mask, is basically in the process of treating a patient. But the government and the law doesn't look at it this manner. As long as you charge the patient, then it is considered a price control item. We hope we don't get into a situation that they increase the number of items which are price controlled, and then of course it can have a big impact to the private hospitals. But at this point of time, the items are not really that relevant to us that will cause any problem, unless they go to a stage where they even control the price of medication as a price control item. Then there might be a bit of an issue, because our business structure is such that we don't have an hospital fee per se like in other countries. So we work around the pricing of our services and our consumables and our goods, but within the competitive range, because it is quite standard among all the hospitals.
Okay, understand. G, what do you think about if the idea of government regulation on the price for masks or gloves on the manufacturer side, not on the hospital side, but on the manufacturer side? Do you think something is possible to be implemented?
Firstly, I would agree with Dr. Kuljit that the government regulation on masks and gloves for hospital to charge the consumer shouldn't be applicable to us, because we use the products for the service delivery and not as a retailer. But to your question as to whether the manufacturers or government should put a cap on the manufacturer's price, I totally agree with that. During the peak of the pandemic, we saw some mask manufacturers prefer to actually export their mask rather than selling locally, because they can actually get a higher price for the exportation of the mask. And then I think government intervened by disallowing exportation of masks, and that has actually benefited us. At one time, N95 was actually causing almost 20 ringgit per piece, and because the local manufacturers prefer to actually sell it or export it overseas. So I believe government should actually intervene on the price from manufacturers to hospitals and to the retail outlets.
Okay, great. Yiki, we have a question from Abdul Rahman here. What is the impact on the audit perspective of the COVID-19 pandemic to healthcare industry?
Interesting. When you say audit and you say actually healthcare industry, is it to the audit industry or to the healthcare? Okay. Probably the question is that what's the impact of this pandemic to the audit industry? Am I right to say that?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, I would say that the good thing is, and again, I must say, it all depends on actually firm to firm. We have actually invested in a lot of actually infrastructure, and when the lockdown was just announced, probably give everyone a 24 hours, and it was actually in the middle of our audit peak period. We able to actually mobilize our resources and get to a state where everyone reached home safe and able to continue working from home. Of course, to a certain extent, something that probably the industry will also have to pick up to the regulators is because as an auditor, the Evidence Act is something that we should be really looking into, because we have to look at original source document as opposed to scanned documents. So that is a little bit of the hurdle in terms of completing actual audit if there's a lot of actually field work has not been actually undertaken. But if you are talking about actually those that a client can actually provide over the soft copies to actually us, we have been continue working, and all of us were given actually the kind of actually the infrastructure, the tools to actually work with our client as well at that point in time. So in fact, we don't see much disruption. We did actually survey with actually our staff as well. they felt that the firm has actually supported to a certain extent. So this is actually, you know, coming from KPMG, but I'm sure most other firms will have actually gone ahead and do the same. But definitely in terms of, if you talk about internal audit, that's a little bit of challenge, because internal audit is always actually doing a lot to do with the production, the operations, and they have to see and feel to a certain extent. But if with technology, it's still actually doable, because even our inventory count, we have actually used virtual to actually perform our inventory count. But of course, this is actually with the system of actually the management to actually help us to use technology to actually perform the count simultaneously with them to a certain extent. So in terms of audit, it's not really. Last but not least, when you're talking about actually finalizing of account, again, it's about local regulations. The Commission of Work were not actually working. They were not allowed to actually work at that point in time. So to actually sign an account, we need the Commission of Work to actually attest the account. So it was basically the hinder, I would say, to actually completing the whole audit process. But in terms of actually fieldwork and completion of actually the fieldwork to the financial statements review and even approval of accounts with the board of directors, we have actually no issue, because everything can be actually done virtually.
I see. Okay. Interesting. Right. Datuk, I just want to ask your opinion, right? In regards to the example that I mentioned just now, right? Virtual hospital, for example, yeah. So when we are talking about disruptive technologies, and a lot of industries has already been disrupted tremendously, right? Including, you know, the usual accommodation industry, or we talk about taxi services as well. In hospitals, if things goes virtually, yeah, so that means that you don't really need a physically huge premise to run at the hospital as what we used to think before. Do you foresee this kind of trend will be coming onto our Malaysian shore very soon, or it will take some time to see things happen like that?
Well, virtual hospitals, I know the hospital in the United States, a lot of these virtual hospitals depend on to few factors. It is not just a patient alone and then communicates with a virtual hospital like what you have in the United States. Many a times patients would see their local doctor, and with the local doctor, they would actually communicate with the virtual hospital in order to get second opinions. And with the event of 5G technology, which which is going to be a groundbreaker, but I'm not sure when the ground is going to break with the CA. With the COVID had delayed everything. To now, we should have had our 5G in place, because that's what they announced middle of the year. But with 5G technology, we can even go to the extent that a surgeon can operate remotely using a robot from one area to another area. But these are all already, the technology is already there. So the patient can actually go to his local hospital, which can be thousands miles away, and another surgeon in another part of the world through virtual technology can actually operate. And this is not science fiction, and this is real. These are kind of concepts that are already there, which will help in better treatment care, especially in huge countries like United States, probably China, and countries like Indonesia, where there are a lot of islands. Accessibility can be bad. So it may work very well. Because Malaysia, yeah, it is something nice to have, but you must remember Malaysia is quite a small country, comparatively speaking. You can reach 3 hours, 4 hours, you can reach from one end to the other end of the country quite easily, except for, of course, Sabah and Sarawak will be a little bit difficult. So to answer your question, yes, I think virtual hospitals will soon come off in many countries. But it will not be so complete. In certain areas, yes, when you have capacity of a particular specialist, that one specialist can actually virtually advise and treat patients together with other doctors in other parts of the country. So I think then the delivery of healthcare becomes better, but it will take time. it cannot happen like what you see in the movie. It's not going to happen that way.
Right. Okay. And also, you talk about one of the suggestions to the ministry itself is on the PPP, right? Private-public partnership. And when we talk about the health tourism itself, and patients are now they can't come into the country. They have to stay back in their own country. So, is there a possibility that hospitals who are very strong at health tourism start to think of partnership with overseas hospitals or overseas doctors instead? Yeah, instead of the patients coming over to Malaysia, they still do their follow-up in their own country, but there's a connection between the Malaysian doctor and that doctor in, say, for example, Indonesia. Do you foresee this kind of trend to happen for these hospitals?
I think some hospitals have already started doing this. They have partners in the other countries where they feed patients to Malaysia. Yeah, it works well, but end of the day, let's be very honest. The main income from medical tourists is when the tourist lands in Malaysia. It's not the remote part of it. The doctor gets his fee, and that's about it. It doesn't go beyond that. But once the patient lands in Malaysia, that's where the actual income comes to the country. In terms of the collateral, I'm not sure the finance people have better words than that. I mean, the other kind of expenditure that a medical tourist will actually spend in the country, the hotels, food, visiting our other tourist spots, plus the treatment encompass. So if you're looking at the financial value, it is actually to get the patient into our country. Just a teleconsult and all that, it's only a very small amount. I'm sure Keng may have a better view on that. She probably could look at the financial aspect of it, which would be better. But I'm very sure that we all want patients to come to our shores.
Right. Well, it's quite true, yeah, because I think if I remember correctly, MHTC did reported the multiplying effect of about 3 times. Yeah, if they come to Malaysia towards the other sectoral areas as well. Yeah, not just in healthcare. Thanks, Datuk. G, I would like to get your opinion, right? If you were to advise the smaller hospitals or clinics, or specifically the SMEs in Malaysia in the healthcare sector, what kind of cost containment strategies should they consider in order for them to be sustainable in a longer period of time?
I think cost containment is a must during this crisis, and to ensure sustainability, and we need to immediately look at spending, and we need to spend only on essential items and also essential capital expenditure, and we need to ensure that we put a freeze on unnecessary recruitment over time, and also look at reviewing all the outsourced providers, and if possible to renegotiate with vendors, either to extend credit terms or delay certain committed items that we have already agreed to buy from the vendor. And smaller players should actively look at their cash flow management to manage their costs and also their revenue to ensure that it can ride through this pandemic. We don't know now that the economy has been opened up. There could be another second round or second wave, they call it. So everybody needs to be very cautious to ensure that whilst the economy is being opened, we are not impacted with another round of second wave, which will then hit us even more severely if the economy is then closed again.
I see. Okay. Keng, as G mentioned, right? Some of the cost containment strategies to consider includes the freeze of recruitment as well, yeah, or the stop of hiring and just focus on what is essential now, right? When you also talk about earlier on, one of the areas to focus on for healthcare sector is on the agile workforce itself, yeah. Do you foresee, and also the digital talent context itself, right? So do you foresee there will be a range of downsizing among hospitals, especially in retrenchment and things like that in the healthcare sector?
I would say I won't say it's going to be a big wave of actually retrenchment. Let me put it this way. Most hospitals at this point in time has been actually already managing their costs very well. All right. It's always scarce because of actually, especially those in a specialized area to a certain extent. So in fact, it's more of actually reskilling, rescheduling, looking into actually, if some certain actually blocks and flaws that you can actually close it up to a certain extent to actually minimize, the utilities and all those things. Those are the things that they should be looking into. For the staff perspective, some even actually rescheduling, no OT, trying to actually make sure they actually decrease some of these costs, mobilize some of their staff in terms of some of the areas that they need to actually increase because of the SOP that is actually required to a certain extent. So these are the things that we are talking about actually, the agility of workforce. At the same time, I'm sure all of us are actually talking about during this situation, parents would prefer to actually work from home, put it this way. And probably the organization can even consider the staff actually take some actually leave, or they call it unpaid leave to take care of actually children at this point in time if they are actually not required to be in the office or actually at the operation. So some of these kind of actually measures they should be actually looking into as well. And then also rescaling some of actually the staff so that they can actually cover up each other and not to actually overload some of the staff who is actually required in some of the departments, and some of the staff in other departments are basically free. For example, as far as I know, a lot of actually the tertiary hospitals has actually increased the volume. The patients are coming back. But if you look at some of the department, like for example the pediatric, that department has not actually the volume is not back yet. I guess the parents are actually worried. So you have to actually mobilize the staff and actually re-look into it, staff planning, and that's why I call Agile Workforce. You have to actually prioritize. You have to even actually divide your staff to actually by tasks instead of just a normal job scope.
I see. Datuk, sorry, just let me. So Datuk, what is your last bit of advice to our audience here, especially to shed them some light? What is the way forward among your APHM members moving forward here?
I think number one, we must take this COVID pandemic as a teaching lesson to all of us, because there were a lot of things that we refused to get used to it. Now we are getting used to a new norm. I think the other important thing, not just in private hospitals and also I think public hospitals, we should get ourselves ready for future pandemics. God forbid that we'll have pandemics in the future, but looking at what goes on these days and also ecologically throughout the world, when we build hospitals, we should have this in our mind, that should there be a pandemic or should there be an area where you're going to have huge number of patients coming to our hospital, are we really ready to accommodate them? Simple things like our operating rooms, our ICUs, they should be built such a way that they can be converted during a pandemic to sustain a large number of patients. There was a worry in the month of March and also April when the Minister of Health did ask the APHM to stand by to help them up in case there is a huge surge of patients that they cannot cope. So there were a lot of things that not only just in Malaysia, we were not as bad as other countries, but if we look at some of the European countries, we find that they were not ready at all to take in so many patients, even for intensive care they had no space. Many patients died because there was no ICU beds. So I think we should look forward in hospital planning that we should be able to convert wards, spaces in our hospital into ICUs and intensive care just within an hour when there is such a pandemic. Just like many airports in the world, it can become a military airport when you don't need the domestic traffic anymore because that's an emergency. So I think we should all look into those kind of areas. We can't have many ICUs built and kept vacant waiting for a pandemic, but what we need to do is we need to prepare ourselves for future such kind of pandemics. I don't think this could be the last one. I hope it's the last one in my lifetime, but you can never know. We just had many such kind of infections in the last 10, 12 years. We're talking about SARS and MERS-CoV. We had so many. So I think we need to learn from this and be better prepared.
I see. So I guess you also introduce the agile facilities, right, required by, in the hospital's planning itself. Thank you very much, Datuk. G, as the finance professional yourself, right, and you'll talk about your belief as, in this modern era, finance professionals supposed to be a bean grower, for example. So what is your last bit of advice to all the finance professionals within the healthcare sector to be a bean grower?
Well, I believe that the traditional accountant's role of a bean counter has actually long gone. We need to be more relevant in the business. I truly believe that the numbers in the financial statement tells a lot of story. So in order for a finance person to be able to give advice to the business, they need to understand the business. And in addition to that, in order to survive the next pandemic, which hopefully we will not be able to see, or I'm not going to be able to see in my lifetime, I think companies need to ensure financial diligence. And because if you don't have good financial, it will be difficult for you to actually ride through any future challenges. If you're highly geared, like what Keng mentioned, then it will be difficult. So for every company, you need to actually make sure the finance team is involved in all the business aspects, understands the business, and be able to proactively be a business partner to the CEO or to the management team or to the operations, so that the ideas and the advices that we give are relevant to the business to actually grow and be successful in the future.
Okay, great. I particularly like the way when you try to talk about being as a business partner instead of just an employee, right? That's a very important mindset for any organization to have nowadays. And thank you very much, G. And Keng, lastly for you, what is your last bit of advice for the healthcare sector companies here to transform and re-emerge later on?
I was actually saying, going back to actually my 5 points, really look at it. There are many ways to actually skin a cat, but those are the 5 areas that is actually imperative for anyone to actually look at it to be able to be actually transform and re-emerge from this pandemic. But I personally felt that for the private and actually public to actually work together to look into the whole ecosystems, because as actually what Datuk has mentioned, there's a lot of things that probably the APHM has been talking to the government. There's a lot of things that we can actually do. If you really look at it, I'm actually very proud that Malaysia is able to actually weather this pandemic. And if you also actually see, we have been actually recognized as a country that we have actually done very well to cope with this pandemic as well. So we do have the kind of resources, this kind of skill set, that to be able to actually have a better healthcare for everyone, and for even a health tourism as a whole as well, for the region and for the ASEAN region. So something that I would say the public and private has to come together to look into actually universal health coverage. And from that perspective, that will actually take through, you know, the healthcare, whether it's public and private, to the next level.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Keng. So that's all for today. Yeah, that we have all the sharings from our panelists. From our sector panelists here, we have Dr. Kuljit Singh, the president of APHM, as well as Ms. G. Aziz. She's the group CFO of Ramsay, Sime, Darby Healthcare. And we also have the advisory side as a panelist as well, Ms. Lee King from KPMG in Malaysia, to share their thoughts with all of us here. Yeah, so thank you so much for all my panelists. And the next session that we're going to have next week on the same Wednesday, 17th of June 2020, 11 to 12:30 noon, the industry board session will be focusing on insurance sector instead. Yeah, the insurance sector. And for that, we have also two sector panelists. One is the CEO of Liam, and another one is the chairman of PM. And the advisory panelist will be Mr. Mok from KPMG in Malaysia as well. Yeah. So if any questions later on, attendees, you can always email or contact us via WhatsApp. And your video will be recorded and will be uploaded into our UOW MKDU YouTube channel. I will send an email to all of you once it's uploaded for your reference. Okay. So again, thank you very much to all my panelists, and thank you so much to all the attendees to attend this session this morning. Thank you and goodbye. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.